Our next speaker and I met in 2007. He had come to New York from his home in Idaho to work with my dear friend and colleague Bud Hopkins, and we just hit it off and stayed in touch over the intervening years and got together when we could. Mike Clelland has written extensively on the subject of alien abductions, synchronicities, high strangeness, owls, as well as his own personal experiences. He has had a lifetime of unusual events that seem directly intertwined with the UFO reality and the UFO phenomenon. Mike began his study of the UFO abduction phenomena in 2006 as a way to better understand his own personal experiences. This act of looking unleashed a flood of synchronicities as well as intense owl sightings. These events have been the focus of his ongoing research. He started a website titled Hidden Experience, which you all should make a point of visiting. He started that in 2009 and has documented his personal stories as well as posted over 200 hours of audio interviews focusing mostly on the abduction phenomena. I remember at one point, after he had gone back to Idaho, Bud saw so many people over the years, but he really liked Mike, and there was something about his honesty and integrity that kept them close for the rest of Bud's life, and I hope for mine. I'd like you to meet my dear friend and esteemed colleague, Mike Clelland.
Suzanne, you're in charge of telling me how loud I am. How's that sound? I'm going to be talking about owls here. Let me just a second. I'm going to start this thing. If the clock works, I'll be all set. I've been to a lot of UFO conventions and over the years. And there's kind of a divide. There's people who come because they're curious, and oftentimes those folks are researchers, and they're curious. It's a genuine reason to be curious. And then there are other people who are there for different reasons. And these are two very different crowds. I sense that there's a lot of folks here who have had the direct experience. The folks I've talked to, this is very challenging and complicated stuff. So, I don't know who's out there or what camp you might be in, but just look back and forth at folks sitting next to you. If the folks who have had this experience, and this isn't universal, but this can be really challenging. This can be really hard on folks. Michael talked about this earlier, just as far as the very human experience of dealing with this. I spoke to a woman a while ago when I was going to tell her a story. I've got a lot of old stories, and they can be interesting, and I was going to tell her the story, and I remember I just got stuck. And I said, this stuff is hard. I guess I was going to tell a story that was going to be an example of that, and this stuff can be really hard. It was hard on me. I feel much better now these days than I did. Turn the clock back a couple of years. And this stuff is not simple. I'm going to be talking about. Does this break the quiet? Can I do that? Yeah. Okay, so I'll try to be aware of that. I'm going to be talking about things that are. Well, I'm going to talk about my own experiences and my experiences with owls, as well as my research with owls. And I don't understand it. I don't know why, but this owl thing shows up. And the folks that have had this experience, their reality, their definition of reality is, it can't remain the same, being confronted with these things. It simply can't remain the same. So, once again, people in this room may have had the experience that there's a sense of isolation that I certainly felt, and I need this camaraderie of being around folks like this. Before I talk about anything, I need to talk about myself in a way. For about 20 years, I worked for an outdoor program. I taught in Alaska for about a decade of that. I have spent a lot of time in the mountains. I've spent a lot of time sleeping outside. some of what I talk to you about will not make sense unless you know this about myself. This is taken in Alaska. This is me on Denali. This would have been my classroom for the 20 years or so I worked outside. I've spent a lot of time in a big mountain environment like this. I've spent a lot of time using maps. I spent a lot of time sleeping out under the stars. I also have drawing skills, so you'll see that in here too, where I'll talk about some stuff. It all started for me before I had any inkling at all of the UFO stuff in October of 2006. I'll be careful to say that. I did have an inkling, though I was certainly aggressively denying that. I would have been 44 years old at that time. I lived in a really pretty place. I lived right near the Grand Tetons on the Idaho side of the Wyoming border. And what I'll do is I'll go out and camp one night in the mountains. And I met this woman. She was living in the town I lived in. Her name is Kristen. And I said, oh, you've been here all summer, right? She said, yeah, I've been here all summer. It's like, oh, you must have camped a lot. It's so great camping here. She looked at me and said, no, I haven't camped at all. I didn't camp once. And I said, oh, I'll take you camping. We should camp. And so I took her out for one night. We didn't take a shelter. It was beautiful. The weather was going to be beautiful. So we hiked into the mountains. We get pretty far. Very light pack. There came a point, and this is sort of like a first date, really. I didn't know her at all. I didn't know who. So, and there came a point when we're talking, sun is setting, beautiful field of wildflowers, and I'm cooking on this little camp stove, and all of a sudden, this owl flies over. And this second owl flies over. And this third owl flies over. And then for the next well over an hour, these owls flew by us, they landed near us, they landed on branches near us, and it was really amazing. Now, just leading up to that, we were sitting and talking before the appearance of the first owl. She was talking about something, and I was kind of like, I'm impressed. This one was talking about something with a depth and a clarity, and it left me really impressed. 3 days later, actually it was 4 days later, excuse me, I said, I'm going camping again, you want to come? And she said, sure. So we went to the same thing, went out for one night, and as we were watching the sunset, one owl flew over, the second owl flew over, and the third owl flew over. And the second time it really freaked me out. The first time it was like, hey, this is pretty cool. The second time it was like, whoa, this really freaked me out. And some years later, I wrote this up as a little diary entry, and I was like, I gotta get a hold of Kristen, because she was talking about something at that initial moment, at that first moment that the owl showed up. And I called her up and I said, what were you talking about at the moment that we saw the first owl, that first night? She said, oh, I remember exactly what we were talking about. She said, I was giving my most heartfelt definition of what God means to me. And that took an already, kind of cool thing and turned it into something really transcendent. So this had a big impact. And now another thing that happened, which I did not talk about at the time, but I'll talk about it now, is when those owls showed up, there was a booming voice in my head that said, this has something to do with the UFOs. Now, I'm quite convinced that those were real owls. They weren't any kind of screen projection. They weren't any kind of, they were real owls. They would land close to us. They looked like owls. They would fly around. They would do owl things. And I had read enough UFO literature at the time to know about the screen memory aspect of this thing. So I just told a story that involves owls, a synchronicity of these things showing up, as well as, even though it was just my own mental thought, but the UFOs make an appearance in this. I've been calling this talk Owl Synchronicity in the UFO Abductee. Now, synchronicity is a big word that was first coined by Carl Jung, and I'll read this. This is his formal definition of it. It is the coming together of inner and outer events in a way that cannot be explained by cause and effect, and that is meaningful to the observer. And I will tell you that as owls showing up was extremely meaningful to me. So a shorter definition would be of synchronicity would be a meaningful coincidence. And it's interesting, I've heard people talk a lot about synchronicities in this talk, and it's part of it. It is part of the overall weirdness of this, the synchronicity aspect of it. The shortest definition is the definition I use, is magic. I mean, it feels weird in the moment, it feels powerful, and I am completely content with using the term magic. initially in around 2009, between about 2006 and 2009, 2010, I was really, my sanity was in question. I felt so pushed right to the edge. And as I said, I guess I said this earlier, but I feel more at peace now, and I'll get into why I feel more at peace now. But the act of looking into the UFO experiences in my life, and I've had three kind of, leading up to all this, I had three events growing up and in my young adulthood that were pretty telling, and I had managed to deny those. I'll talk about those in a moment. And this is important to me. So I told a friend of mine, I felt like I was getting my high horse, and I said, UFO abductees, they have more synchronicities than the statistical norm. My friend is smart, and she rolled her eyes she looked at me and said, anyone on a spiritual path will have more synchronicities. And I thought, she's right. She's right, and that implies that UFO abduction is part of the spiritual path. I can't say whether that's true or not, but that is a nice way to frame the experience. For me, it's helpful to frame it that way. So, UFO abduction, does that equal spiritual awakening? Yes and no. I think you could do that. And I've talked about this stuff to folks. And I had one friend of mine, and sort of talking about how the pattern I'm seeing is that folks will be in a place of yearning, a place of wanting, and a place of questioning. And quite honestly, when I was with Kristen in the mountains, and I had that first owl experience, I knew there was going to be a day when I was going to look into the UFO experiences. I knew I was putting it off, I was denying it. I had those three events that I had, and I knew I was going to look into this stuff. The owl event happened, and it forced me to look into it. I've talked to some friend of mine. You can tell he's getting a little antsy when I talk about this stuff, and he's like, "You're not following the scientific method." And I'm like, "What do I care? I'm not a scientist." So I almost treat this more as like dream analysis in a way. Like I'm looking at reality, and then sort of the same way if somebody had a dream and had interesting imagery in the dream, someone could say, "Oh, we can look at that imagery and ponder that." And I'm just like looking at my daily life and saying, "We can look at this imagery and ponder that." So here's the three events. And I'm going to go through these a little quick, just given the amount of time I have. Northville, Michigan, in 1974, I would have been a 12-year-old boy. Curiously enough, Kristen is from Northville, Michigan. She wasn't born in 1974 yet, but so I saw this out a window with a friend. It was nighttime. We watched it for about 30 seconds, and then after we saw it, it was actually moving in this very controlled. It was not a helicopter, it was not an airplane, it was not a balloon. I mean, it was moving in this vivid, controlled, clear way. It was crystal clear in this way that was a little unnerving. We were both kids, we ran downstairs and we drew it. We sat at the kitchen table and got pencil paper and drew it. This is what I drew. Now, there's these little dots there that weren't in the other illustration, but those are noted. There was these odd dots that were kind of blink, blink, blink in the sky, and then when the little dots sort of bumped into what I'll call the craft, or this, because I called it a ship in 1974, that thing disappeared. And this little event, I definitely have a very clear memory of this, and I thought about this a lot as an adult. Now this other memory, this would also been, it's 1974, I grew up in a small town called Southfield, Michigan. And this is just a house in my neighborhood, a neighbor's house. And that yellow X that I put on the sidewalk is exactly where this event took. I mean, like I got that to the millimeter, I've got that pinned. I was walking home at night from a high school football game with a friend. We got to that spot on the sidewalk, and all of a sudden, there was this orange flash in the sky. I felt like God flipped a light switch. Just click, on goes the orange sky, click, off goes, it goes back to normal. Totally silent. And even at the time, as a 12-year-old boy, we were like, that was jarring. Was it a meteor? No. Was it lightning off in the distance? Was it an explosion? Was it somebody's, we actually thought, did the power lines touch and go zap? No, it didn't. None of that made sense. So I got home and my parents were mad at me. What are you mad at me for? It's like, I wanted to be home in time to see a television show. The television show starts at 10 o'clock. I'm well ahead of time, so it should be about 9:30. And they pointed at the clock. No, it's 11:30. So it's 2 hours of missing time. This happened not too far from here. This happened just outside of Gorham, Maine, very close to where the first experiencer support thing. I was living there in the winter of, would have been either January or February of 1993. I can't pin this down exactly. So I wake up in the middle of the night, there's bright light shining through my bedroom window, and I sit up in bed. This bed was pushed against the window like that. And I did actually have a dinosaur on the windowsill like that. So the bed is pushed up against the window, and I sit up and look out the window, and there's 5 skinny, creepy things walking towards the house. And they're all backlit by this bright thing. Now that bright thing was small. It didn't seem like I did not see like a landed flying saucer. It seemed like maybe the size of a washing machine or something. I heard a voice very clearly in my head. And it said, "Oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down." That's exactly what I did. I mean, that's scary. I mean, I should have had a different reaction than to go, "Oh," and then go to sleep. That was the reaction I had. So, the next morning, I dismissed it completely as a dream. I never even bothered to go out and see if there was footprints in the snow. So those are the 3 events. Now, sort of coming up to present day, in 2009, I started an online website, which I'll refer to as a blog. It's in a blog format, and I've started writing about my experiences. And one of the things I've been writing a lot about is owls. Besides that story I told earlier with Kristen, I have a lot of stories like that. Any story I tell here, especially about the research stuff I've done, isn't going to be a one-off. I mean, these things there's a very clear pattern, and I might share one story rather than 10. But as Peter said, the website has been about UFO abductions, synchronicities, and owls almost exclusively, and as well as my own experiences, which all that stuff just collides together. In last summer, I posted an essay, it was about 40 pages long, and the title of the essay was "Owls and the UFO Abductee," and it was kind of the core of what the talk I'm giving right now is. And I figured, get that out of my system, it's kind of interesting, I'll crank out this essay, it'll make nice, it's pretty tidy, and the act of writing that essay, it unleashed, on one level there's synchronistic stuff, and on another level people would say, "Oh, now that I read your essay, here's my experience," and now, at this point I'm writing a book. And another thing that's happened is if you go online and Google owls and UFOs, my name comes up like the first 8 times. I'm writing a lot about it. So if there's someone off in New Zealand that's had an event with an owl and a UFO, they're going to find me. So I've been collecting these stories, and they are bizarre, and at the same time they're really seductive. Really seductive. In the sense, they were interesting to me, especially to me. I mean, having had my own owl experiences. So as I proceed forward in all this, I just, I'll talk to folks. And I'm probably not more than one person in the room here. I'll just, as a conversation, "Hey, have you had any owl experiences?" And it's not 100%, but people will say, "Oh, that's interesting. No one's ever asked that before," because I have. And I'm like, "Okay, I want to hear it." So I've been collecting these stories and trying to document them and trying to archive them. And here's a good example. Actually, this fellow I just met for the first time. I've been interacting with him over the phone and over email. He lives on the East Coast here, and so I met with him while I was in here. His name is Derek. This is a good example of one of these stories. So he's this would have been in 1995. He's in the desert of Arizona, and he camping, sitting out under the stars. Beautiful starry night, which we spent a lot of time in the desert. You get these amazing nights, and all of a sudden he and his buddy look up and there's an owl on a cactus looking down at them. He actually kind of reviewed this illustration. He said, "The owl was a little closer, and it was so close that it was glowing from the light of the campfire." So I didn't know that until I just showed this illustration to him a couple days ago. So he watches the owl. It's a little eerie, which owls are. They're spooky. And the owl flies off. And the next thing that happens is a triangular UFO zips over them, hovering. He described it, and it was interesting to see him in real life to describe it, how it moved and hugged the terrain of the land. So I have this story in one form or another a lot. Now, like this fellow Derek, he's like, "Oh, I have this experience. He's like, I went through a spiritual awakening recently, and I'm doing, I've had all these other odd experiences where, I feel like I'm being lifted out of my bed by skinny beings and then passed through the wall. And I said, "You think you're a UFO abductee?" He goes, "Oh, no." So, this is an imperfect vocabulary word, but I'm calling these people the maybe people. And Debbie was very clear about that, that she was on the other side of that maybe line. And I have a strong kinship with these folks, because that is the person I was. I feel like I can relate very strongly to that. This is a wind chill story. I got a lot of wind chill stories. Owls hitting wind chills, flying across the front of us. So this woman, she's had a lot of very intense experiences in her life, none of which imply UFO stuff, very psychic experiences. And she started doing UFO research. And she's driving along at night, and she thinks to herself, I've been doing this UFO research. And, I'm ready to see them. And then she gets this very clear voice in her head that says, "You are not ready to see us. We will startle you." And she's like, "After all I've been through, you're going to startle me?" And bam! This owl hits the windshield right at that moment.
Wow.
And, so how do I take that? How do I interpret that? All I can do is sit and say, that's a very interesting story. So, I'll talk a little bit about the screen memory thing in a moment, but so the owls have been a focus for me, and I have been flooded with owl stories, and all people sending me owl stories and things like that. So, and it's been fun. It's been a really cool project. And the owls are like a tiny, tiny, tiny aspect of something much bigger and much weirder and much grander. So it feels good, because I think I would just lose my mind if I tried to, I'll study the entirety of this big, bag of craziness. And so instead I can study a little teeny, bitty point of this big bag of craziness. So owls show up in human mythology. This is scratched into a cave in France. It's estimated to be over 30,000 years old, so we have owl stuff going right back to the beginning. Owls show up. This is Athena, the Greek god of wisdom. She has her owl there, which is actually that is a little owl. That's what it looks. That's in the bird guide. That's what it's called, a little owl. And so here's Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom, with her helmet and her little owl, and that transfers right over to the Roman goddess of wisdom, Minerva, seen with her helmet and little owl. And the question is, and then this goes all through Native America, and it goes all through Nordic. It goes through there's mythology in Africa and the Egyptians. So the question is, why all the mythology about owls? And my answer would be, is owls simply look really intense. I think anyone seeing an owl is going to say that. If you from ancient man to seeing an owl tonight, you're going to go, that's pretty intense looking. And they have very intense eyes. The other reason, which I think is very valid, is owls can see into the darkness, and that I think is where the metaphor of the owl as a messenger comes in. So the owl can see into the darkness. The owl can see into other realms. That implies it can travel to the other realms. That means it can travel to the other realm and come back. It can travel to the other realm with a message and come back. That means it can travel to the land of the dead. It can travel to the land of the gods. And I'm sort of proceeding forward with this research with, owls are messengers, and that is a truism in a mythology book. The owls represent dream time. They represent the unconscious. This is Hedwig in Harry Potter. Hedwig, this is the most popular series of books in the history of publication, and Harry Potter has an owl that delivers the mail. That is perfect. We started with things scratched onto a cave wall, and we've got right to today, the owl as a messenger, delivering the mail. J.K. Rowling has owl right in her name. And as long as we're in Maine, so does Raymond Fowler. Has owl right in his name. So the screen memory. Now, I'm not focusing on the screen memory, but it's very important to talk about. Talked to a guy at a UFO conference. We were sitting in a UFO support group. Everyone sits in a circle like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and this guy's off in the corner. He's real quiet. Time's running out. At the very end, everyone's talking time. He kind of raises his hand really cautiously and says, "Hey, has anyone in the room here had any experiences with owls?" And he almost jumped out of his chair when everyone raised their hand. And he jolted back and he told his story. He's like, "Well, I was driving down the road at night and I just 4-foot tall owl on the side of the road. I pulled up next to it, rolled the window down, I looked at this thing, and I got a really bad feeling. So I drove off. And then he was a photographer, and he went out later and took some pictures of owls. There's an owl nest in the woods near him, so he gets the camera out, he looks at this owl, and he's like, I don't think that was an owl I saw that night. So he went through hypnotic regression, and nothing really came up except that the owl was wearing boots. So I have another story, and there's a woman. Her pen name is her pen name is Lucretia Hart, and she worked at a girls' camp in Washington State. She was 19 years old at the time. She was very well aware that she had already had lots of contact experiences in her life, but they'd all happen at night. Bright sunny day, she's walking down this path, she's right next to the cabins. She could hear the girls like giggling and laughing at the girls' camp at the cabins. She walks around a corner, there, standing in a field, looking at her is a gray alien. She looks at this thing, she looks at it, and she senses the thing is the thing. It looks at her, she senses the thing, goes, oh crap, like busted, and so right at that moment, she hears like this psychic echoing reverberation, and this thing goes owl, 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 and she watches it turn into an owl. Turns around and runs into the woods. I mean, anyone who's sort of like dipped their toe into this kind of research is going to hear stories like that. So, I spoke at a conference a while ago, and I spoke at a while, and I carried on stage a 4-foot tall owl made of cardboard. I wish I had it here right now. It's really great. You really get an idea of how big a 4-foot tall owl is. And I'll tell you, so that little one on the other side of me is about 27 inches tall, and that would be a big owl. They don't get much bigger than the small owl, and they certainly don't exist anywhere as big as what people are reporting. I took that cardboard owl, I made it in my living room, cut it out, Elmer's glue and stuff like that, and then painted it, and then I took it to this lonely road where I live, and I parked it out in front of my car, and it was, I had to get in there, and I get a camera, and back up a little bit, and then I was like, this is really creepy. This is like really terrifying. And it's like, this is like a 2-dimensional piece of cardboard I found in the trash. So it was like, and I'm like, how do people say, oh, I was driving down the road and saw a 4-foot owl? It's very common for people. I've got documented like too many times where it's like, the owl was looking over the hood of my car. And like, the 27-inch tall owl, you're not going to see it if you pull up to it. It's going to be hidden by the hood of your car. So what this tells me is that there's a very powerful form of mind control going on. Okay, this is the woman. Her name is Lucretia Hart. It's her pen name. This is her website. She's the woman who saw the owl or the gray alien turn into the owl at summer camp. So I would recommend this site. Her site is called That Spirals In. So beyond owls, people will say deer. People see clowns. People see dead relatives. Jesus actually shows up a lot too, which is very interesting. So these very iconic, archetypes show up. And I just get the sense that there's like this psychic closet. And like, what's appropriate for right now? Let's open the psychic closet and put on this costume. And owls show up a lot, but they're certainly not exclusive to owls. Raccoons show up a lot too. So the researcher, you ask an abduction researcher, you're like, any experience, you have any stories of owls in your research? And they'll go, oh yeah. And they'll talk about the 4-foot tall owl on the side of the road. They'll talk about the screen memory. And I'm like, no, I'm not interested in that. I want to hear about real owls. And they'll say, no, I don't really have any stories with real owls. But you talk to an abductee, you talk to someone who's had the direct contact experience, and they'll say, that's funny shit. And then you get these really weird stories. Now, it's not 100% of the time, so it's not like a universal thing, but it's enough. My email inbox, I'll tell you, is enough to prove the reality of this stuff. So the question is, why owls? You talk to the UFO research, the UFO abduction researcher, and he'll say, well, owls have these great big eyes. They look kind of like gray aliens, so the owl is choosing them because they look like gray, because they're magical. They do. And that gets repeated over and over again. I hear people say it as if it's a fact. It may well be exactly what's going on, but there's no proof of that. So I'm cautious. And I don't want that line of thought, the owls have big eyes, so that's why the aliens choose them as their screen memory. I don't want that to become dogma, because I really question that. And I think anytime anything in this realm becomes dogma, the little red flag should go up, like bing, 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 like be very cautious of that. So the best, I don't know if this is true or not, but the best avenue of thought I have gone down for what it might mean is that owls as an archetype. And both Plato and Carl Jung used the term archetype. And the archetype would imply something that's universally present in our psyches. And the owl represents a thought form that we know of in our unconscious. So instead of communicating, the image of the owl, instead of communicating to our logical mind, is instead communicating to our unconscious mind, to something deeper. So my focus, and what I'm most delighted by and having the most fun researching, is real owls that show up in the presence of the abductee. And oftentimes in the round of, at the time of heavy contact experience, people will say like, like back in, I was living in that apartment and I was having a lot of experiences when I was living there. I was going back a few years and it's funny, there was always owls hanging around that apartment or that house or, that road that I was always worried about. So now here's where things get really weird. And I have a lot of stories that I can't, obviously time doesn't allow for me to share them. But there are synchronicities that show up within this research. And synchronicities to me are a sign to pay extra close attention. So here's just one example of this how weird it gets. So there's these husband and wife team. They're doing a documentary about synchronicity. They're doing this very creative process, and I think the creative process is kind of part of that tangled mess that makes up this stuff. So they're doing a documentary on synchronicity, and they got their cameras and they're going around the Mission District of San Francisco, and they got these murals. So here's a mural here with you can see there's a flying saucer, there's a gray alien over there, and there's some Native Americans doing a little ritual dance or something there, or performing a ceremony now. So there's another one here. This is straight owls. They're shooting images of ceremonies and rituals and gray aliens and flying saucers and owls. And they set their camera down, and this happens. They didn't know this until they went through the editing process. So here they're shooting a documentary on synchronicity, filming owls, and they get a UFO by mistake. So I talked to this husband and wife, and they're like, "So, any odd experiences with UFOs?" And well, this great beings came into the house, and they ran upstairs and hid in the bathroom and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, "Do you think you're an abductee?" I'm like, no. So, and I can't, it's not my job to tell people what I suspect, but that's their job. So. This stuff gets very strange. So, I'm proceeding forward. Owls equal UFOs equal synchronicities, right? They're all the same thing. Obviously, they are not all the same thing. They're very different. But I think they have the same resonant power. I mean, people can get influenced by owls. You can get influenced by synchronicities. You can certainly get influenced by UFOs. So these things are all blurring together. John Mack put out a book in 1999 called Passport to the Cosmos, and he compared and contrasted the UFO abduction experience to the shamanic initiation. And this, to me, has been this framework, this has been, it shows up over and over again. And obviously I'm drawn to it. I read this book, it inspired me, and now am I cherry picking the data so it fits my conclusion? I don't know. But there's something, I'm convinced the shamanism thing is somehow tied into this. The shaman, like the owl, is the intermediary between the two worlds. The owl is the messenger, it travels to some other realm, it comes back with a messenger. That's what the shaman does. The shaman is some funny guy that lives out in the tent at the edge of the village. You have a spiritual or emotional or philosophical question, a metaphysical question, you bring it to the shaman, and they, through ritual or whatever, they'll go to another realm and they'll come back with hopefully an answer. So there was a woman that worked with John Mack. Her name is Elizabeth. I've had long talks with her, she has had she reminds me a lot of me. She's had a lot of very strange owl experiences. So here's one. She was at the very first experiencer support group. So the abductee support group, the very first one, run by John Mack at his home. So they all went to John Mack's home and they all sat in a circle, and he's a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and the meeting went well. So they pull out, they carpool together. A bunch of folks carpool together. So they get in the car, they pull out of the driveway, and one turns to the other one and says, "What'd you think of that? How'd that go?" And at that moment, a big white owl swoops down over the windshield and flies in front of them, leading them the way down the road. And it's almost like you get this, the way she described it, it was like it happened as they were pulling out of the driveway. You get this feeling this white owl was like standing on the roof, like, "Come on, I'm waiting." And so I'm not sure what to make of that. There's an author named David Weatherly who wrote a book which was quite popular a couple years ago called Black-Eyed Children. He is a paranormal researcher. He's very open-minded. He doesn't draw delineations between Bigfoot and owls and black-eyed children and other paranormal phenomena. So, he's also a shaman, which he doesn't talk about that often. And he knew I was doing this owl research. He said, "Oh, Mike, I got a story for you." So he goes to the home of someone who has been having ongoing contact experience. He pulls into the driveway, and he's got his little audio recorder because he's going to record the conversations he has with the woman. So he's looking down at the recorder, and as he's looking down the whole car, he feels this thump in the car, like goes. And he looks up, and there's an owl standing in the hood of the car, staring at him through the windshield. This is a shaman at the site of a house that is having a lot of UFO contact experience, and an owl shows up, all in conjunction. David Weatherly, so this is going back to that essay that I published last summer. So David Weatherly is a shaman, and I'm writing about shamanism in this thing, and I'm like, I don't really know that much about shamanism, so I'm kind of worried I'm talking out of my hat. So I email him and say, "David, can you read this essay? I just want you to read the shamanism thing, just make sure I'm not, I'm not out of line." He says, "Sure." So I send him the essay. A few days later, he's like, "Oh, it's good essay, great, I liked it. Oh, by the way, you want to hear a funny story?" Great. And so I'm reading the essay at my desk, and this thing goes flits by my window. Look out the window, and an owl lands on a tree branch. "How long have you been living in that house?" 20 years. "How many owls have you seen?" Never once. Never saw one owl once here at the house." So while you're reading an essay about owls, and you're a shaman, an owl flies by the window. Yeah, so now I could have done this whole presentation, an hour-long presentation, and then added another hour, probably only telling stories about people seeing owls while reading that presentation. I've got initially, right when it came out, it was out of control, like checking my email, like I basically check in the morning, like, "Oh, not another one." And they were so weird. They were so weird that people would be like, "Oh, I was reading your essay," and then this is a very benign one, but there's some of them were much weirder. It's like, and then I heard an owl hooting out the window. And then as soon as I got to the last page of the essay, the owl stopped. Hooted the entire time I read your essay. So I've been doing a lot of research, which is a nice way to do research, is to have an e-reader, because you can really, it's got a great way to search out words. And with the words I'm searching out is owl. So I get the e-reader, right? I'm holding it in my hand, and I click, I type in owl. That's what I'm searching for, and then what the word that comes up is knowledge. Comes up over and over and over again. This is John Mack's abduction book, and curiously enough, it was like 11/11 is when I took the screen grab. I didn't know that at the time. So but I don't want knowledge. I'm not interested in that. I want owls. So I got to go knowledge, skip past knowledge, skip past knowledge, skip past, and that has become a metaphor for how I'm proceeding forward with this, because I cannot depend on my knowledge to go down this road. I have to follow my heart and my intuition. And I'm obviously using some of my knowledge here, but I'm trying to use as little as possible and to really give myself over to using the intuition. So this has become representative of how because if I said first of all, UFO abduction is absurd, right? It can't happen, that's ridiculous, and then it would involve me, and that's even more ridiculous. And how owls are connected, that does not make any sense at all. Logical mind, turn it off, ignore it, deny it. But I haven't denied it. I have been trying to follow my heart. This is I'm going to talk about a story, and that's going to be the last thing I talk about. It's kind of a long, complicated story. So the more tangled and the more complicated and the more difficult to understand and the more mixed up a story is, the more I trust it. And I suspect there's people in this room that have those kind of stories, that the more you examine it, the more bizarre it gets, and the things are connected. The little spider webs are coming in from everywhere. So in a very real way, the more complicated and mixed up and impossible to untangle the story is, the more I trust it. This I'm going to refer to as my confirmation event. This happened on March 10th of 2013. It was an event that is all tangled up, and I'm going to try to tell it formally here in a way that won't become madness. I was driving home from a UFO conference, the conference that's held each year outside of Phoenix, Arizona. And so the little green push pin is where I slept on the side of the road. I sleep outside all the time, it doesn't bother me, so I'm totally content sleeping on the side of the road. And it's interesting, I knew where I was going to sleep that night. I'd driven down that road once before, and as I was driving, it was even later, and it got dark just as I was pulling in, and I found this great spot. So here's what it looks like. This is from Google Maps. And that white arrow in the background is important. So you can see this little turnoff there, a little dirt road that's got junipers and stuff there, so it's very easy for me just to pull in, tuck my car around there. So I lay my sleeping bag down, and I put a pillow out, and I have a big, thick sleeping pad. It's cold, it's March, and it's stars, a bajillion stars, and it's freezing out. It's felt great. I have this winter sleeping bag. And so I wake up in the middle of the night, and I look up on this hill, and I see this. This is something I recreated to match what I saw. And I lay there, and I'm looking up at this thing, and I say, that looks just like a landed flying saucer. Look at it, I'm like groovy now, and I'm like all into this stuff. And if it was, I'd be like, I'm psychic enough. If this was a flying saucer, I wouldn't know it, right? So I kind of tap in, I think, nothing. Roll over, go to sleep. I woke up 2 more times. So each time I woke up, I saw this thing. So the second time I woke up, there's a coyote howling right near my head. I couldn't see it. The bushes and sagebrush, it could have been just behind something. And this thing was like, I've lived out west half my life, and this was loud. Like, it felt like if I had a little dog bone, I could have just taken it from my sleeping bag and gone, caught it in its mouth. I woke up a third time, and there was a light behind a bush. And I sat up, and it was like, did a car pull in? It doesn't look like a car headlight. And I was like, no, it's not someone with a flashlight. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in the outdoors. I know what a car headlight looks like. I know when someone walking around with a flashlight, and they kind of go, huh. Look up, the round structure still on the hill. I'm like, somebody built a really cool house, like a really round house, like in Malibu or something. So this is a rendition. So the yellow push pin there is where I was sleeping, and then the green push pin there is where the round structure was. And I'm very good with maps. I'm convinced of the exact spot of that round structure. I know I'm absolutely 100% convinced where I was sleeping. So, and that's 1.6 miles apart. So whatever was up there was big. Now this is a shot during the day. I've gone back since then. There's nothing there. I tried to look on Google Maps initially that same day that I woke up and saw it. There's nothing there. So this happened afterwards. But the morning after I did what I do, and this kind of thing, I made a blog post, wrote about it. I'm like, really weird. Saw this thing in the hill. Don't know what it is. I post this thing online, and then this is moments later. I'm standing there by my desk after posting this thing. I get this hyper clear, extremely vivid image of a map. And it's a map with 3 push pins and a yellow line, and it lasts for maybe a half a second, and then it's gone. Poof, it's gone. And I like to make maps. I'm very skilled with maps, so I'm like, I'll just sit down and figure this out. I knew that the green push pin on one end was the event that had happened the night before when I was sleeping out in southern Utah. And I knew that the blue push pin way off to the east took place just outside of Cortez, Colorado, in a little town called Dolores. This line is 231 miles long. I did not know what the thing in the middle was. I wasn't worried about that, so I plotted these things out. Now I got to tell the story about what happened in Dolores, Colorado, outside of Dolores, Colorado. I was camping with a friend. Her name is Natasha. I met her at a UFO conference. She's, I could tell some stories and then I would say, like, Natasha, do you think you're a UFO abductee? She'd go, oh, no. Okay. Anyway, we had a great trip, amazing trip, driving around the desert, and camping, and it was so fun. May, it's not too hot yet. So we pull into Cortez, Colorado, and the car's acting up. I get out of the car and I sniff around and something smells funny with the brakes. I ask someone on the street, like, can you take us, where's a good spot? And they always, a mechanic over there, we pull in, and the mechanic takes it in the back, and Natasha and I hang out for a little bit, and then the guy comes out from behind, from back in the garage. He's got the oily rag, he's wiping his hands. And he goes, I can't let you leave town, or you'll die. Okay, I said, so, and he explains, okay, your brakes, there's something wrong with your brake, I don't have the part, I can't, legally I'm not allowed to release the car to you, because if you got in an accident, I would be considered liable by the sheriff's department, and, so, great. And then he says, oh, and we won't get the part for 5 days. So we're like, okay, we're stuck in, so he says, I'll set you up, I know something. So I got a really cheap rent-a-car, and Natasha and I drove, spent the next 5 days driving around, but that night, the guy says, I can't let you leave town, just ominous. That night we just camp out nearby, so we camp out in the woods. This is exactly where it is. There's the blue push pin, there's the yellow line, that stretches 231 miles to the event in southern Utah. And someone says, well, you go to the edge of town, you take this road, there's this beautiful forest, camp anywhere you want. Great, so that is exactly where we were camped. We set up the tent. Natasha's nervous that night. Natasha's very psychic. I'm oblivious to stuff like this. We wake up, middle of the night, both of us are screaming uncontrollably. I've never experienced anything like that ever. To say I was scared is like an understatement. I was saturated in fear. It would be, I use the term synthetic fear, because this doesn't follow normal fear. If a grizzly bear ripped through the tent, put his jaws around my throat and started biting, I wouldn't have been scared as that. So we're both like, what is happening? Both of us feel the same thing. She describes it the same thing. It goes on for about a minute, maybe a little 5 minutes, and then that's a lot to say. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be that dramatic. Then we poof, go to sleep. So we're from total fear to completely asleep. The next thing I know, I'm floating. I feel this elevator up feeling, and I'm floating up, and I pass right through the roof of the tent, and I end up in this white, mystical realm. Now, when I was floating up, I saw this image on the side of the tent. It was actually it was like it felt like a pizza pan. It was in the tent, and that's what it looked like. The glowing pizza pan is circled with a single dot in the middle of it, and that's what's called a mandala. So I floated up. As I was floating through the tent, I saw a mandala. I floated out the top of the tent. As I was floating, I was saying to myself, I have to remember this, I have to remember this, I have to remember this. I get up, and then all of a sudden I'm saying, I'm like, and I'm not in I don't know anything about craft or nothing, it was just a white realm, and I'm saying to myself, am I at a table? Am I at a table? Am I at a table? And then I hear Natasha, who's got a thick German accent, she says, Mike, you're floating. And then I'm back in the tent. And I don't think that happened, the thing at the end. I don't think she said that, and I don't think I but that's the way I remember it, because I don't actually remember waking up. All of a sudden it was just, but that is the memory, that's accurate how it happened. Now, the next morning, Natasha described seeing something at that same spot in the corner of the tent. If I had enough time, I could talk for a half hour on like what this unleashed, but I'll give you the very short thing. The mandala, Carl Jung wrote about the mandala, and he said, of the mandala, their appearance indicates a profound rebalancing a profound rebalancing process is underway in the psyche. And I was like, wow, that actually is kind of, and I didn't figure this out until just literally a few weeks ago, well, a few months ago, I found this quote, and I was like, that is exactly transfers to where I was, my rearranging my life. My paradigm had shattered in so many different ways with all these owl sightings. I was rebuilding my paradigm. So the next morning, Natasha and I get up out of the tent, we walk around. I'm literally looking for the burn mark in the ground where the flying saucer has landed. And we don't find it, right? So, and I also had this odd scratch that started at my left shoulder and went down to my belly button. And when you look closely at the scratch, it wasn't a scratch at all. It looked like a single rose thorn had scratched it. When you get really close to it, it was actually a row of tiny blisters, one after another, all lined up. Tiny fluid-filled blisters. I'd never seen anything like it. A couple days later, no itching, no scratchy, didn't hurt or anything like that. I washed it off in the shower, and then as soon as it was gone, just washed away, both Natasha and I went, we should have taken a picture of it. We're both pretend to be UFO investigators. We didn't do anything. So the next day, we ended up. I asked a friend, and she said, "Oh, you should go down to Canyon de Chelly." And Canyon de Chelly is it's in the Hopi Nation in Arizona, and there's a shaman named Howard, and he performed a sweat lodge ceremony. It was beautiful. I loved it. It was very life affirming, and he was a great, super charismatic guy, and the theme was surrender. So there's this. So I can't tell this story without starting it with the guy who says, "You can't leave town, you'll die," and then it ends with a metaphoric ritual of death and rebirth. So I knew the 2 points at each end. I had to figure out the point in the middle. So I just spent a long time telling about the blue point and then the green point, and I got to figure out what the point in the middle was. And I said, that's right, Natasha and I were traveling through southern Utah, and this would have been in March of 2011, after the UFO conference. We were driving back to my house in Idaho, and we were driving on the desert, and we were sleeping out under the stars, and so we found this great little turnoff in what's called the Bird Trail Road. So it was back along that dirt road. And I had been driving all day, and Natasha had come from Germany, so I was tired, and Natasha was jet lagged. So she's like waking me up, like, Mike, I can't sleep. What do I do? I'm like, oh, just take a walk. It's beautiful. So I mean, imagine the nighttime in the desert. It's glorious, and I said, just take a walk. It's totally calm. It's like a cold, beautiful night. And so she walks off, and as I'm laying there, she walks off. As I'm laying there, I'm listening. Can you hear that? I don't know if it's in the background. I'm listening to the hooting of a great horned owl. I'm going to step away from this thing. So I would have been here, and then the owl would have been in this bush right there. I mean, and I never saw it. But I heard it really clearly. And it's a great horned owl has a very specific cry. So I'm sleeping there. Natasha is all of a sudden back. She goes, Mike, we gotta go. And I'm like, what? She's like, I saw something. We gotta get out of here. I'm like, what'd you see? She said she describes walking. She said actually, first it was really pretty. She said she actually was it was really magical, and she said she felt like she was sparkling, which I think is a really interesting. So she walks down and she sees this thing that she thinks is someone with a flashlight, kind of low to the ground. She looks at it, it's like too big to be a flashlight, and then it's like the size of a beach ball. She sees this glowing white orb, and then she looks at it, and this thing goes and disappears. Poofs, flashes, and it's gone. Really scared, so she runs back and she tells me it's like, okay, let's go. So we throw everything in the car, we start driving in the middle of the night, and now, what I'm going to describe next, I can feel like I can divide my life into two halves. What happened next changed my life. I had a little computer program. I was trying to figure out I nailed where we were sleeping. I know I was laying there in that spot listening to that owl. And then when I lined the thing up, the yellow line goes like that. This is a 231-mile line, right? So you have a line, you have 2 points at either end. You can easily make a straight line between them, that little point in the middle. So that's where I was sleeping. At that point, any doubt, any denial, any wondering was gone. And what happened was the grinding tape loop in my head had basically come to a screeching halt. The tape loop that said, is this real? Can this possibly be happening? Is this going to, that was over. So we have a coyote on the westernmost point, an owl in the middle, and a shaman at the other end. I love these things. I love this kind of stuff. This is like, my heart goes out to this kind of stuff. The map arrived in a psychic image. I love making maps, and I was sleeping out under the stars. Well, actually, we were in a tent in one spot, so sleeping outside is something I love to do. It felt like this was a mystery that only I could solve. Like I was the only person who could decipher these clues. It was like distinctly tailored for me. So 3 events. Natasha was with me at the event in southern Utah, outside it, and then she was with me at the side of the Bird Trail Road where she saw the orb. And March 10th, where the event happened in where I saw the craft from the hilltop. March 10th is Natasha's birthday. There's about 10 weird little things that like all sort of dovetail together like this. I have a little bit more time left. We got about 7 minutes left. I'm going to tell one more story. I got this. So this doesn't have anything to do with UFOs, but I think it has everything to do with the research I'm doing. I talked to a woman. She's now a grandmother. She explained that in the 70s, in the early 70s, she was very depressed. She was a teenager. She was very, very depressed. And she was planning to commit suicide. And she said she was driving down this road. She had a spot all picked out. She had a pillow in the car so she could lay down, and she had a hose that she could take from the exhaust into the car. She's driving down the road. She's just about to turn in to the spot that she had already chosen. She's slowing down, and a white owl flies right up to her windshield. She comes to a complete stop. The owl hovers in place. They lock eyes for like 15 seconds. And the owl flies off. And she's still here. So here's the story of an owl, which is so associated in some of the mythology with death and ominous and gloom. Here's an owl that saved a woman's life. I've talked to her, pressed her pretty hard to see if she had any kind of UFO experiences. She hadn't. She does consider herself psychic, though, which is very interesting. Since looking into this stuff, I started the story back at the beginning with the event with Kristen in the mountains near my house. I no longer look at reality the same way. Reality is much richer, much fuller than I was taught to believe by the forces that make up our present society out that door. It is not like that. It is much more complex. There's a much more depth to it. And something very mysterious is taking place just beyond that veil. Now, my sense, very strong, there's very few things I know. I don't know the source of all this stuff. I know that something is going on. Something very profound is going on. I know that. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know what it means. But I know that I can speculate all around and wonder. But I just see all of us as walking down this path, and there are clues and messages along that path. And if you're observant, they are there. They're either whispering or they're screaming. And for reasons I do not understand, I have been bumping into owls along that path. Now, like synchronicities, these owls are proof of magic. And these owls have changed me. I am different now. I am not the person I was. And I have to say, it was not seeing the aliens in the backyard that changed me. It was not seeing the UFO as a 12-year-old boy. It was not the missing time walking home from school. I could deny all that stuff. It was the owls that I could not deny. And it was the owls that pushed me off a cliff. I wrote a little essay, and I used that metaphor. The owls pushed me off a cliff, and my friend said, "Don't you think that's a little, like, dramatic?" I was like, no, that's perfect. The owls pushed me off a cliff. And now I am forced, and the owls forced me to look into myself. It forced me to look into my own experiences. For a long time, I could not say I was UFO abductee. I don't like that term. I think it's a loaded term. I wish there was another word. And to quite honestly, I don't even know what UFO abductee means anymore. But like that complicated story, that tangled up knot, I mean, reality is that tangled up knot. And there's something elusive going on. I don't understand it, but I am connected to it. And I know that now because of these owls. Owls are messengers. The challenge is, do I have the bravery to not only hear that message, but to truly live it? Thank you.